My wife mocked my cheap watch during a business dinner. I said nothing. 2 hours later, a billionaire saw it and went pale. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I said my father's name. He stood up trembling. "Then she has no idea who you are. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I should have seen it coming. After 30 years of marriage, you learn to read the signs. The way Zoe's jaw tightened when she looked at my clothes. The forced smile she gave the hostess. The subtle eye roll when I ordered the house wine instead of something from their premium selection. But I didn't expect what happened next. We were seated at Ristorante Milano, one of those places where the lighting is dim enough to hide imperfections, but bright enough to showcase wealth. The mahogany tables gleamed under soft amber lights, and the scent of garlic and aged wine hung in the air like an expensive perfume. Zoe had insisted we come here for my meeting with potential clients from Henderson Development Group. "This could change everything for us, Dennis," she'd said while getting ready, applying her makeup with the precision of a surgeon. "These people have real money, don't embarrass me." I'd nodded, adjusting the simple navy suit I'd owned for 15 years. It was clean, pressed, respectable. But as I sat across from Richard Pemberton and his wife Catherine, I could feel Zoe's disapproval radiating from beside me like heat from a furnace. The conversation had been going well. Richard seemed genuinely interested in our company's logistics capabilities. We were discussing a potential contract worth $200,000 when I reached for my water glass. That's when Zoe saw it. My watch. It was nothing special to look at. A simple steel case, aged leather strap worn soft from decades of wear. The face was clean white with black numbers, no diamonds or gold plating. My father had given it to me when I turned 18, and I'd worn it every day since. "Oh my God, Dennis," Zoe's voice cut through our conversation like a knife. "You're still wearing that old thing?" The table fell silent. Richard and Catherine looked up from their menus, clearly uncomfortable. I felt my cheeks warm as I glanced down at my wrist. "It keeps good time," I said quietly, trying to steer the conversation back to business. Zoe laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Good time? Dennis, that watch looks like it came from a garage sale. What will these people think?" "Zoe," I started, but she wasn't finished. "I've been telling him for years to get something decent," she said to the Pembertons, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "But he's so stubborn about spending money even on something as basic as a proper timepiece." Catherine Pemberton shifted in her seat, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Richard cleared his throat and reached for his wine glass. "I keep telling him, what's the point of working so hard if you're going to walk around looking like you shop at thrift stores?" Zoe continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "Sometimes I wonder if he even cares about making a good impression." My throat felt tight. 30 years of marriage, and she still found new ways to cut me down. I could feel the other diners glancing our way, their conversations growing quieter as they strained to listen to the spectacle at our table. "The watch has sentimental value," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Zoe scoffed. "Sentimental value doesn't pay bills, Dennis. It doesn't make people take you seriously." I looked down at the watch face, remembering the weight of my father's hand on my shoulder the day he gave it to me. "This belonged to my father," I said. "Your father who worked in a shipyard his whole life," Zoe shot back. "Your father who never owned anything worth more than his monthly paycheck. God, Dennis, when are you going to stop living in the past and start thinking about our future?" The words hit me like physical blows. I felt something crack inside my chest, something that had been bending under pressure for years finally reaching its breaking point. Richard Pemberton was staring into his wine glass as if it held the secrets of the universe. His wife was studying her napkin with intense concentration. "Maybe we should order," I suggested weakly. "Yes, let's focus on why we're here," Zoe said, suddenly switching back to her charming hostess voice. "Dennis gets so emotional about the strangest things, it's actually sweet in a way." But the damage was done. The conversation limped along for another hour, but I could see it in Richard's eyes. The deal was dead. Who would want to do business with a man whose own wife treated him like a failure in public? As we waited for the check, Zoe excused herself to the restroom. Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "That's an interesting piece you're wearing," he said, nodding toward my watch. I looked down at it, surprised. "Thank you, it's not worth much." "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward my wrist. Confused, I unbuckled the strap and handed it over. Richard held it carefully, turning it over in his hands. His expression changed as he examined the case back. His eyes widened slightly, and I saw his hand tremble almost imperceptibly. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice strange. "It was my father's," I said. "He gave it to me when I graduated high school." Richard continued staring at the watch, his breathing shallow. "What was your father's name?" "William Morrison," I replied, confused by the intensity in his voice. Richard went completely still. For a moment I thought he might faint. He looked up at me, then back down at the watch, then up at me again. "Morrison," he whispered. Zoe returned to the table, her lipstick freshly applied, chattering about dessert. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Richard holding my watch. "I hope Dennis isn't boring you with stories about that old thing," she said with a forced laugh. Richard didn't respond. He was still staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Slowly, carefully, he handed the watch back to me. "Keep it safe," he said quietly. "It's more important than you know." Zoe rolled her eyes. "See what I mean? Everyone's too polite to tell him the truth." But Richard wasn't being polite. There was something in his eyes that made my skin prickle, something that suggested this evening was far from over. As we gathered our things to leave, Richard pressed his business card into my hand. "Call me tomorrow," he said. "We need to talk." Walking to the car, Zoe was already dissecting every moment of the dinner, cataloging my failures like items on a shopping list. "Well, that was a disaster," she said, clicking across the parking lot in her heels. "Did you see their faces when you wouldn't shut up about that stupid watch? God, Dennis, sometimes I think you try to sabotage us." I unlocked the car in silence, my mind replaying the look in Richard Pemberton's eyes. Something about that watch had shaken him to his core. But what? And why did I have the feeling that everything was about to change? As I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For 30 years, I'd been the man Zoe saw when she looked at me. A disappointment, a failure, someone to be ashamed of. But tonight, for just a moment, I'd seen myself through different eyes. And something about that watch had caught Richard Pemberton's attention in a way that suggested there was more to this story than anyone knew, including me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to Zoe's steady breathing beside me, turning Richard Pemberton's business card over and over in my fingers until the edges were soft from handling. The way he'd looked at my watch kept playing in my mind like a broken record. This wasn't the first time someone had noticed it, but it was the first time anyone had reacted that way. Most people glanced right past it, just like Zoe said they would, just like she'd been telling me for 30 years. The clock on our nightstand read 3:47 when I gave up trying to sleep. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Zoe, and padded downstairs to the kitchen. Our house was modest, a 2-bedroom ranch we'd bought when we were first married. Beige walls, generic furniture from department stores, nothing that spoke to who we really were. Or at least nothing that spoke to who I really was. I made coffee and sat at our small kitchen table, the watch laid out in front of me under the fluorescent light. In the harsh glare, it looked even more ordinary than usual. The leather strap was cracked in places, the steel case scratched from years of daily wear. But I'd never cared about its appearance. It was the last thing my father had given me before he died. The memories came flooding back, as they always did when I held the watch in the quiet hours. My father's voice, deep and gravelly from years of cigarettes. "This watch has been in our family for 3 generations, Dennis. It's not about what it's worth, it's about what it represents." I'd been 18 then, standing in his study overlooking the harbor. The smell of salt air drifted through the open windows, mixing with the leather and tobacco scent that always clung to his clothes. Ship models lined the shelves, each one a reminder of the business he'd built from nothing. "What does it represent?" I'd asked. "Choice," he'd said simply. "The choice to be who you really are, not who the world expects you to be." At the time, I thought I understood. Now, sitting in my kitchen at 3 in the morning 30 years later, I wondered if I'd ever understood anything at all. Zoe had made her opinion of my father clear from the beginning. To her, he was just a blue-collar worker who'd gotten lucky. She never understood why I spoke of him with such respect, why I kept his photograph hidden in my wallet, why I wore his watch every single day. "You're living in the past, Dennis," she'd say whenever his name came up. "Your father worked in a shipyard. He fixed boats. There's no shame in that, but there's no glory in it either." But she was wrong about him. She was wrong about a lot of things. My father hadn't just worked in shipyards, he'd owned them. Multiple shipyards, up and down the East Coast. Morrison Maritime had been one of the largest private shipping companies in the country when I was growing up. We'd lived in a mansion overlooking the ocean with staff and cars and everything money could buy, and I'd walked away from all of it. The decision had seemed so clear back then. I was 29, fresh out of business school, watching my father work 18-hour days to keep the company growing. I saw what that life had cost him. The missed dinners, the forgotten birthdays, the way business consumed every conversation, every thought, every moment of peace. When he died of a heart attack at 62, alone in his office at 2 in the morning, I knew I didn't want that life. I wanted something real, something meaningful. I wanted love that wasn't complicated by money or power or expectations. So I'd liquidated my shares in the company, put the money in trust, and walked away. I'd taken a job in logistics, rented a small apartment, and tried to build a normal life. That's where I'd met Zoe. She was working as a receptionist at a law firm then, beautiful and ambitious and full of plans for the future. She talked about wanting a simple life, a good man who would love her for who she was. She said she was tired of dating men who only cared about money and status. I thought I'd found my soulmate. For the first few years, it was everything I'd hoped for. We lived modestly but comfortably. Zoe seemed happy with our little apartment, our weekend trips to the lake, our quiet dinners at home. She never asked about my family or my past, and I didn't volunteer the information. I wanted to be loved for Dennis, the logistics coordinator, not Dennis, the Morrison heir. But gradually, things changed. Zoe started noticing what other people had. She began comparing our life to the lives of her friends, her co-workers, the people she saw in magazines. The contentment that had once filled our home was replaced by a restless dissatisfaction that grew stronger each year. "Why don't you ask for a promotion?" she'd say. "Why don't you look for a better job? Why are you so comfortable being mediocre?" I'd tried to explain that there were more important things than money, but she'd roll her eyes and change the subject. Over time, she stopped asking and started demanding. Then the demands became criticisms, and the criticisms became public humiliation. Like tonight. Sitting in our kitchen, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Zoe didn't love me. She probably never had. She loved the idea of me, the potential she saw in me, the life she thought I could give her if I just tried harder. But I'd been trying to be something I wasn't for so long that I'd forgotten who I really was. I picked up the watch and fastened it around my wrist, feeling the familiar weight of it settle against my skin. My father had been right about choice. For 30 years, I'd chosen to be the man Zoe wanted me to be. The man who apologized for his clothes, his car, his watch, his dreams. The man who sat quietly while his wife destroyed his dignity in front of strangers. I thought about Richard Pemberton's reaction, the way his hands had trembled when he'd held the watch. Something about it had shaken him, something that went far beyond its modest appearance. And tomorrow I was going to find out what that was. I finished my coffee as dawn light began creeping through our kitchen windows. Upstairs I could hear Zoe stirring, beginning another day of disappointment in the life she'd chosen. But something was different now. For the first time in years, I felt like I was waking up too. I had a phone call to make. The watch was all I had left of the man I used to be. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to help me remember who I was supposed to become. I called Richard Pemberton at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. My hands were steadier than I'd expected them to be, but my heart was racing as I dialed the number from his business card. "Richard Pemberton's office," came a crisp voice. "This is Dennis Morrison. Mr. Pemberton asked me to call." There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. "Please hold, Mr. Morrison. He's been expecting your call." Within seconds, Richard's voice came through the line, urgent and intense. "Dennis, thank God you called. We need to meet, today." "About the contract?" I asked, though I already knew this had nothing to do with business. "No," he said quietly. "About your watch, about your father, about things you need to know." 2 hours later, I sat across from Richard in his private office on the 42nd floor of the Pemberton building. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched out below us like a living map. His office was larger than my entire house, decorated with original paintings and furniture that probably cost more than I made in a year. But Richard barely seemed to notice his surroundings. He sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together, studying my face as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to think carefully before you answer. When your father gave you that watch, did he tell you anything about it? Anything about where it came from?" I shifted uncomfortably. "He said it had been in our family for 3 generations. "What else?" "That it was about choice, about being who you really are." Richard nodded slowly. "Did he ever mention the Morrison Maritime Corporation?" My throat went dry. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over 20 years. "How do you know about that?" Richard's expression grew grave. "Because your father saved my life, and my company, and my family's entire future." The room felt like it was tilting. "I'm sorry, what?" Richard stood up and walked to a wall safe hidden behind a painting. With shaking hands, he withdrew a small wooden box and set it on his desk. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a watch identical to mine. 1987, he said softly. I was 28 years old, fresh out of Harvard Business School, full of big ideas and bigger debts. My father had left me a small shipping company that was bleeding money faster than I could count it. I was 6 weeks away from bankruptcy when your father called me. I stared at the watch in the box, my mind reeling. My father called you? William Morrison didn't just own Morrison Maritime, Richard continued. He was the most respected man in the shipping industry. When smaller companies were failing, he'd step in, not to buy them out or absorb them, but to help them succeed. He saw potential where others saw problems. Richard picked up his watch, holding it carefully. He gave me a loan of $5 million. No collateral required except my word. He said if I was serious about building something lasting, I needed to prove it to myself first. $5 million, I whispered. The terms were simple. Pay it back when I could, with minimal interest, but there was one condition. Richard's voice grew thick with emotion. I had to accept this watch. He said it was a reminder that some things matter more than money, that trust once given was sacred. My hand moved instinctively to my wrist, feeling the familiar weight of my father's watch. You paid him back? Every penny, plus interest. It took me 15 years, but I paid every cent. By then, Pemberton Development had become what it is today. He gestured to the opulent office around us. Your father made all of this possible. The room was spinning now. All these years, I'd thought my father was just a successful businessman. I'd never known about the loans, the help he'd given to struggling companies, the lives he'd changed. There's more, Richard said quietly. The watch he gave you isn't just any timepiece. It's a 1943 Patek Philippe, commissioned specifically for your grandfather. There are only 12 like it in existence, all made for the original Morrison Maritime Board of Directors. I felt the blood drain from my face. How much is it worth? Conservatively? $75,000. But that's not why it matters. Richard leaned forward. Dennis, that watch is a symbol. It identifies you as William Morrison's heir. The man who walked away from one of the largest maritime fortunes on the East Coast. The words hit me like physical blows. How do you know I walked away? Richard smiled sadly. Because your father told me. He was proud of you for choosing your own path, but he was also worried. He said you'd given up everything to chase something real, something meaningful. He hoped you'd find it. And have I? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Richard's expression grew serious. That's not for me to say, but I will tell you this. Watching your wife humiliate you last night, seeing you sit there and take it, that's not the behavior of a man who's found what he was looking for. Shame burned in my chest. She doesn't know. About my family, about the money, I never told her. Why not? I thought about Zoe's criticism, her constant disappointment, her need for status and wealth. Because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I have. Richard was quiet for a long moment. And how's that working out for you? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I thought about 30 years of apologizing for my clothes, my car, my ambitions. 30 years of being made to feel like I wasn't enough. Your father left everything in trust, Richard said gently. The companies, the properties, the investments, it's all still there waiting for you. Morrison Maritime is now run by a board of trustees, but they've been hoping you'd return someday to take your rightful place. How much? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The trust is currently worth approximately $250 million. The company itself is valued at around $800 million. The numbers were so large they felt abstract, meaningless. $1 billion legacy that I'd walked away from to work in logistics for $42,000 a year. Dennis, Richard said, his voice urgent now, your wife doesn't love you. She loves the idea of you, the potential she sees in you. But she's spent 30 years trying to change you into something you're not. That's not love. That's control. I looked down at my watch, thinking about my father's words all those years ago. Choice. The choice to be who you really are. What would you do? I asked. Richard smiled, but there was sadness in it. I'd stop pretending to be poor to test someone who's already failed the test. The ride home felt like the longest 40 minutes of my life. My mind kept circling around Richard's words, around the magnitude of what I'd just learned. I wasn't just Dennis Morrison, middle management logistics coordinator. I was Dennis Morrison, heir to a maritime empire, son of a man who'd quietly changed dozens of lives and built a legacy that stretched across decades. And my wife had spent 30 years making me feel ashamed of who I was. When I walked into our house, Zoe was in the living room flipping through a magazine. She looked up as I entered, her expression already annoyed. You're late, she said. I made lunch reservations with Patricia and her husband. You need to shower and change. I stood in the doorway, looking at her, really looking at her for perhaps the first time in years. The way she held herself, the expensive clothes she wore despite our supposedly tight budget, the casual dismissal in her voice when she spoke to me. We need to talk, I said. She rolled her eyes. About what? If this is about last night, Dennis, I'm not apologizing for telling the truth. You can't keep walking around looking like you don't care about success. I know who Richard Pemberton is, I said quietly. Zoe's expression shifted slightly. So, he's some businessman. What does that matter? He knew my father. Your father's been dead for 30 years, Dennis. What could that possibly matter now? I walked over to her chair and knelt down beside it so we were eye level. She looked startled by the gesture, probably because I hadn't been this close to her voluntarily in months. Zoe, I said carefully, what if I told you that everything you think you know about me is wrong? She blinked, confusion replacing annoyance. What are you talking about? I reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, always pulling away. What if I told you that my father wasn't just a shipyard worker? What if I told you that I come from money, real money, and I chose to walk away from it? Zoe stared at me for a long moment, then laughed. Dennis, what the hell are you talking about? Your father fixed boats. My father owned the boats, he owned the shipyards, he owned a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The laughter died on her lips. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Richard Pemberton recognized my watch because my father gave him an identical one 37 years ago, along with a $5 million loan that saved his company. Zoe's face went pale. You're serious? Dead serious. The trust fund I inherited is currently worth $250 million. The company is worth about $800 million more. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on our mantel. Zoe's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Finally, she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" And that was when I realized the most important truth of all. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, I said, not for what I have. The look that crossed her face then told me everything I needed to know about the choice I had to make. Then she has no idea who you really are, Richard had said. But now she did, and so did I. The silence that followed my revelation lasted exactly 47 seconds. I know because I counted them, watching the second hand on the mantel clock tick away while Zoe's face cycled through emotions like slides in a projector. Shock, disbelief, calculation. And finally, something that made my stomach turn. Greed. $250 million, she said slowly, as if testing how the words felt in her mouth. Zoe, I started, but she held up her hand. Wait, just wait. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. You're telling me that for 30 years, Dennis, you've let me think we were struggling? You've let me clip coupons and shop at discount stores and worry about the mortgage payment? I watched her pace, noting how quickly her shock had transformed into anger. Not grief for the years of deception. Not hurt that I hadn't trusted her. Anger that she'd been denied access to wealth. I wanted a real marriage, I said. Based on love, not money. She spun around, her eyes blazing. Real marriage? Dennis, I've spent 3 decades trying to motivate you to be better, to want more, to stop being so damn satisfied with mediocrity. And all this time you were sitting on a fortune? I was trying to build something authentic with you. Authentic? Her voice rose to a pitch I'd rarely heard. What's authentic about lying to your wife for 30 years? I felt the first stirrings of my own anger. What's authentic about spending 30 years making me feel like I'm not enough? About humiliating me in public? About treating me like I'm some kind of failure? Zoe stopped pacing. I was trying to help you succeed. No, I said, standing up. You were trying to mold me into someone else. Someone who would give you the life you thought you deserved. And what's wrong with wanting a better life? Nothing. But there's something very wrong with destroying your husband's self-worth because he can't give it to you. We stared at each other across our modest living room, the space between us feeling like a canyon. In the harsh afternoon light streaming through our windows, I could see every line on Zoe's face, every mark of the years we'd spent together. But looking at her now, I realized I barely recognized the woman I'd married. How much did you say the trust was worth? She asked quietly. And there it was. Not, how could you keep this from me? Or, why didn't you trust me? Just a question about numbers. It doesn't matter, I said. It doesn't matter? Her voice cracked with disbelief. Dennis, we could have had everything. A real house, real cars, vacations, nice clothes. We could have been somebody. We were somebody. We were husband and wife. Zoe laughed bitterly. Husband and wife? Living in this tiny house, driving cars that barely run, wearing clothes from department store sales. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it's been? The words hit me like a physical blow. Embarrassing? Yes, embarrassing. Watching other couples our age buying vacation homes while we debate whether we can afford dinner at a nice restaurant. Seeing my friends get jewelry for anniversaries while you give me flowers from the grocery store. I thought about the grocery store flowers, how I'd chosen them carefully each time, looking for the freshest blooms, the prettiest colors. How I'd thought they were romantic, personal, better than something expensive and impersonal. I thought the flowers were sweet, I said weakly. Sweet doesn't pay for a lifestyle, Dennis. I sat back down heavily, feeling decades older than my 61 years. What lifestyle? What kind of lifestyle requires you to humiliate your husband in front of strangers? Zoe's expression softened slightly, but not with remorse, with strategy. She came over and sat on the arm of my chair, her hand touching my shoulder. "Honey," she said, her voice taking on the tone she used when she wanted something. "I know I've been hard on you sometimes, but I was just trying to push you to reach your potential. I never stopped believing in you." I looked up at her, seeing the calculation behind her eyes. "Really?" "Of course. And now that I know the truth, now that I understand what you've been going through, we can fix this. We can access the trust, start living the life we should have had all along." "The life we should have had?" "Yes. The life you were born for. The life your father built for you." She squeezed my shoulder. "Think about it, Dennis. We could travel, see the world. We could buy a real house, something we could be proud of. We could finally be happy." I stared at her, watching her spin this fantasy of wealth and status, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Zoe, what about the last 30 years? What about all the times you made me feel worthless?" She waved a hand dismissively. "That's in the past. We're talking about our future now. But the past matters. The past is what brought us here. The past is what we make of it." She slid down into the chair beside me, taking my hands in hers. "Dennis, we can start over. We can be the couple we were always meant to be." I looked down at our joined hands, remembering when holding hands with Zoe had made me feel complete. Now it just felt like another manipulation. "What if I said no?" I asked quietly. Her hands stiffened in mine. "No to what?" "No to accessing the trust, no to changing our life. What if I said I want to keep living exactly as we have been?" Zoe pulled her hands away. "That would be crazy. Why would you want to stay poor when you could be rich?" "Because I'm not poor. I'm simple. There's a difference." Simple is just another word for settling. I looked around our living room, at the modest furniture we'd chosen together, at the photographs on the walls documenting 30 years of what I'd thought was a shared life. But looking at them now, I realized that in most of the pictures, Zoe was posed, performing for the camera. I was usually looking at her with genuine affection, while she was looking at the lens. Even in our photographs, we'd been living in different realities. "Zoe," I said carefully, "if I access the trust, what happens to us?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what changes between us? Do you suddenly start respecting me? Do you stop criticizing everything I do? Do you stop making me feel like I'm not enough?" She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "We'll both change. Money changes everything. We'll be different people." "I don't want to be a different person. I want to be loved for who I am right now." "Dennis, be realistic. Love isn't enough if you're not happy." "But I was happy. Or at least I was trying to be. Until you made it clear that my happiness didn't matter to you." Zoe stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're sitting on a fortune and you want to keep living like we're broke college students. I want to keep living authentically. Authentic poverty is still poverty." I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a gear clicking into place. "Zoe, answer me honestly. If I told you right now that I was never going to access the trust, that we were going to live exactly as we have been for the rest of our lives, would you stay married to me?" The question hung in the air between us. I watched Zoe's face, saw the moment she realized what I was really asking. Not whether she'd stay, whether she'd be happy to stay. Her silence was answer enough. "I see," I said quietly. "Dennis, you're not being fair. You can't ask someone to ignore financial security." "I'm not asking you to ignore it. I'm asking if you love me enough to live without it." "That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" Zoe sat back down, but this time she didn't touch me. "What are you saying?" I reached up and touched my watch, feeling the smooth metal case, the worn leather strap. My father's legacy. Not the money or the company or the properties. The choice. The choice to be who you really are, regardless of what the world expects. "I'm saying I've made my decision about our marriage," I said. Zoe went very still. What decision? I met her eyes, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time in decades. I'm saying that 30 years is long enough to wait for someone to love me for who I am. The color drained from her face. Dennis, don't be hasty. We can work this out. Can we? Because I don't think you even know who I am. You've spent so long trying to change me that you've never bothered to actually see me. That's not true. When's my birthday, Zoe? She blinked. What? My birthday. When is it? October 15th. October 23rd. What's my favorite food? Dennis, this is silly. What's my favorite food? Zoe's mouth opened and closed. You're not picky. Blueberry pancakes, like my mother used to make. I've told you that 100 times. I felt tears threatening, but I pushed them back. What's my biggest fear? Dennis, stop. My biggest fear is spending the rest of my life with someone who sees me as a project to be fixed instead of a person to be loved. Zoe was crying now, but I couldn't tell if the tears were genuine or strategic. We can fix this, we can go to counseling, we can start over. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. No, Zoe, we can't. Because the problem isn't our marriage, the problem is that you don't love me. You love the idea of me, the potential of me, the money I could give you, but you don't love me. That's not true. Then prove it. Tell me right now that if we never access the trust, if we live in this house and drive these cars and shop at discount stores for the rest of our lives, you'll be happy. Tell me you'll stop trying to change me. The silence stretched between us, filled with 30 years of disappointment and unmet expectations. Finally, Zoe whispered, I can't. And just like that, it was over. I'd made my choice. Now I had to live with it. The next 3 days passed in a strange, hollow quiet. Zoe and I moved around each other like strangers sharing a hotel room, polite but distant. She'd wake up early and leave for work without saying goodbye. I'd come home to find dinner waiting on the counter, still warm but with no invitation to eat together. On the surface, it looked like we were giving each other space to think, but I knew what was really happening. Zoe was strategizing. I could see it in the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, in the careful way she spoke when she did speak, testing different approaches like a salesperson trying to find the right pitch. She was waiting for me to come to my senses, to realize what I was giving up, to choose the money over my principles. She was waiting for me to prove that everyone has a price. The call from the lawyers came on Thursday morning. I was in my office, staring at spreadsheets that seemed meaningless now when my phone rang. Mr. Morrison, this is James Patterson from Patterson Wells and Associates. I represent the Morrison Maritime Trust. My heart started pounding. How did you get this number? Mr. Pemberton contacted us. He said you might be ready to discuss your inheritance. I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. Richard had made the call I'd been avoiding for 25 years. I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation, I said. Sir, if I may, the trust has been waiting for you for over 2 decades. The Board of Trustees has kept everything exactly as your father wished. Morrison Maritime is still operating under his principles, still helping smaller companies succeed. Your return would honor his legacy. Honor his legacy. The words stuck with me through the rest of the workday. When I got home, Zoe was waiting in the living room, dressed in the navy blue dress she wore to important occasions. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled like she was going somewhere special. We need to talk, she said. I sat down across from her, noting that she'd positioned herself in the chair that caught the best light from our window. Even in our most serious conversations, Zoe was performing. I've been thinking, she began, her voice carefully modulated, about what you said the other day, about love and authenticity and all of that. I waited. You're right, she continued. I have been trying to change you, I admit that. But Dennis, I was only trying to help you reach your potential. My potential? According to who? According to anyone with eyes. You're brilliant, you're capable, you come from an incredible family legacy. Why shouldn't you embrace that? I studied her face, looking for genuine emotion beneath the careful presentation. Because embracing the legacy means abandoning the choice that made it meaningful in the first place. Zoe leaned forward, her expression earnest. But what if the choice was wrong? What if your father intended for you to come back eventually? He left that decision to me. Then make a different decision now. People change their minds. People grow. She reached for my hands, and this time I let her take them. Dennis, we could do so much good with that money. We could help people, support charities, make a real difference in the world. I looked down at our joined hands, feeling the softness of her skin, remembering when her touch had meant everything to me. What charities, Zoe? She blinked. What? What charities would you want to support? What causes matter to you? I watched her scramble for an answer, saw the moment she realized she'd been caught in another performance. Well, there are so many important causes. Children, education, the environment. Which children? Which schools? What aspect of the environment? I pulled my hands away gently. Zoe, you can't even name a single cause you care about beyond your own comfort. Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the frustration underneath. Fine. Yes, I want a better life. Is that so wrong? Is it wrong to want nice things, to want security, to want to feel proud of what we've accomplished? No, I said quietly. But it's wrong to build that life by tearing down your partner. I never tore you down. Last Monday night, you called me embarrassing in front of strangers. You've spent 30 years making me apologize for who I am. Zoe's voice rose slightly. I was trying to motivate you. To become someone else. To become the best version of yourself. According to your definition of best. We stared at each other across the coffee table, the weight of 3 decades pressing down between us. I could see Zoe calculating, trying to find the right words to turn this conversation in her favor. Dennis, she said finally, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. I love you. I've loved you for 30 years. Yes, I've made mistakes, but every marriage has problems. We can work through this. Do you love me? I asked. Of course I do. Then answer me this. If I choose to access the trust, will you love me more? The question caught her off guard. I saw her eyes widen slightly, saw her mouth open and close as she searched for the right answer. That's not fair, she said finally. It's the only question that matters. Love isn't quantifiable, Dennis. It's not like there's a meter that goes up and down. Isn't there? I stood up, walking to our mantel where our wedding photo sat in a silver frame. We looked so young, so hopeful, so completely unaware of what we were promising each other. Because for 30 years it's felt like your love for me was directly tied to your satisfaction with our lifestyle. That's not true. I turned back to her. Then why did you never ask about my family? In 30 years of marriage, why did you never wonder why I never talked about my childhood, my father's work, my inheritance? Zoe was quiet for a long moment. I thought you were ashamed of your background. I was protecting it. There's a difference. Protecting it from what? From someone who might love it more than they love me. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I watched Zoe's face cycle through emotions, landing finally on something that looked like genuine hurt. Is that really what you think of me? She whispered. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Zoe, I think you're a good person who got lost somewhere along the way. I think you married me believing you could be happy with a simple life, and when that turned out to be harder than you expected, you decided the problem was me. Maybe the problem was both of us. Maybe. But I'm not willing to spend the rest of my life feeling like I'm not enough. Zoe was crying now, real tears that smeared her carefully applied mascara. So what are you saying? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the business card James Patterson had given me over the phone. I'm saying I called the trust lawyers today. Her breath caught. And I told them I want to access my inheritance. For a moment, hope flared in her eyes, bright and desperate. Dennis, that's wonderful. I'm accessing it, I continued, so I can afford to give you everything you deserve in our divorce. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Divorce? I'm going to make sure you're taken care of, Zoe. You'll get the house, a generous settlement, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. But I'm not going to spend another day pretending that financial security can fix what's broken between us. She was shaking now, her hands trembling as she wiped at her eyes. Dennis, please, we can make this work. I can change. I don't want you to change. I want you to be honest about who you are and what you want. What I want is you. No, I said gently. What you want is the life you think I can give you. There's a difference. Zoe looked around our living room as if seeing it for the first time. This house, this life, it was never enough for me. I know. I kept thinking if I could just push you a little harder, motivate you a little more, you could change me into someone else. She nodded, fresh tears spilling over. I'm sorry, Dennis. I really am sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo 30 years. We sat in silence for a while, the evening light fading through our windows. Finally, Zoe spoke. What happens now? I looked at my watch, my father's watch, thinking about choice and authenticity and the courage it takes to start over at 61. Now, I said, we both get to find out who we really are when we're not trying to be someone else. The next morning, Zoe packed a bag and went to stay with her sister. We agreed to handle the divorce quietly, amicably. She would get the house and enough money to build whatever life she wanted. I would return to Morrison Maritime, not to reclaim an empire, but to honor my father's memory by continuing his work of helping others succeed. As I watched her car pull out of our driveway for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Choose the life you've always despised, I thought, or lose everything. But as it turned out, losing everything was exactly what I needed to find myself. 6 months later, I stood in my father's old office, looking out at the harbor where Morrison Maritime had begun 79 years ago. The room smelled of leather and salt air, just as I remembered it. The ship models still lined the shelves, each one representing a vessel that had carried cargo across the world's oceans under our family name. But it wasn't the same office I'd fled as a young man. Gone were the mountains of paperwork that had consumed my father's final years. The frantic phone calls, the 18-hour days, the consuming obsession with growth at any cost. In their place was something simpler, more deliberate, a business built on relationships rather than transactions. The transition back to Morrison Maritime had been smoother than I'd expected. The board of trustees had maintained my father's vision beautifully, growing the company by helping smaller firms succeed rather than absorbing them. They'd honored his commitment to ethical business practices, fair wages, and community investment, but most importantly, they'd preserved his legacy of giving struggling entrepreneurs a chance to prove themselves. My secretary knocked softly on the door. Mr. Morrison, the 3 o'clock appointment is here. I turned from the window, adjusting the cuffs of my simple white shirt. I still dressed modestly, still drove the same reliable sedan I'd owned for 8 years. Money, I'd learned, was a tool, not an identity. Send them in, please. The young couple that entered my office reminded me of myself at 30, full of hope and desperation in equal measure. The woman carried a worn briefcase. The man clutched a manila folder thick with business plans and financial projections. Mr. Morrison, the woman said, extending her hand, I'm Sarah Chen, and this is my husband, David. Thank you for seeing us. I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. Please sit. Tell me about your company. For the next hour, I listened to their story. A small logistics firm specializing in sustainable shipping practices, struggling to compete with larger companies despite having superior technology and environmental credentials. They needed a loan of $800,000 to expand their fleet and hire more drivers. Banks had turned them down. Venture capital firms wanted too much equity. They were weeks away from bankruptcy when someone had given them my name. We know it's a long shot, David said, his voice tight with anxiety. But we believe in what we're building. We think we can make a real difference in the industry. I studied their business plan, noting the attention to detail, the realistic projections, the clear understanding of their market. But more than that, I saw something in their eyes that reminded me of Richard Pemberton all those years ago. The hunger to build something meaningful, not just profitable. What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed? I asked. Sarah leaned forward. Because we're not trying to be the biggest, we're trying to be the best. Our customers stay with us because we care about their success, not just our bottom line. I smiled, thinking of my father's words about building relationships rather than empires. I'm going to approve your loan, I said. The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. David's eyes filled with tears, and Sarah gripped her husband's hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us." Actually, I do. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a watch identical to the one on my wrist. "This comes with the loan." David looked confused. "I don't understand." "It's a reminder," I said, fastening the watch around his wrist, "that some things matter more than money, that trust once given is sacred, and that success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you help others achieve." As they left my office, their gratitude filling the air behind them, I felt the deep satisfaction that had eluded me for so many years. This was what my father had built. Not just a company, but a legacy of helping others succeed. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and smiled. "Dinner tonight. I'm making those blueberry pancakes you love." Ellen. Ellen Martinez had come into my life 3 months ago when she'd interviewed me for a local newspaper article about Morrison Maritime's community investment programs. She was a widow, a retired teacher who now freelanced as a journalist. She drove a 12-year-old Honda, lived in a small apartment filled with books, and had never asked me about my money. Instead, she asked about my dreams, my fears, my favorite foods and childhood memories. She listened when I talked about my father, about the choices that had shaped my life, about the 30 years I'd spent trying to be someone I wasn't. I texted back, "I'll bring the coffee, the good kind from that little shop you like." Her response came immediately. "Perfect. Don't forget to wear that handsome watch." I looked down at my father's timepiece, thinking about the chain of choices that had brought me to this moment. Walking away from the family business, marrying a woman who couldn't love me as I was, hiding my true identity for 30 years, finally finding the courage to reclaim it. Each decision had seemed monumental at the time, but now I understood they were all part of the same journey. The journey to discover who I really was when I stopped trying to be someone else. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Morrison, there's a call for you on line 2. "Who is it?" "A Zoe Morrison. She says it's personal." My heart skipped slightly. In the 6 months since our divorce, Zoe and I had spoken only through lawyers. The settlement had been generous. She'd received the house, $2 million in cash, and enough monthly support to live comfortably. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to a bigger house in a better neighborhood, joined the country club, started dating a plastic surgeon. "Put her through?" Zoe's voice came through the phone, tentative and strangely small. "Dennis, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all. How are you?" I'm fine. Good, actually. The house is beautiful, and Richard, that's who I'm seeing now. He's very successful." "I'm glad you're happy." There was a long pause. "Dennis, I saw the article about Morrison Maritime in the newspaper, about the loans you're giving to small businesses. Ellen did a nice job writing it." "Ellen?" "The reporter who interviewed me. We've been spending time together." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm happy for you, Dennis, really." I waited, sensing there was more. "I called because I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "Not for the divorce. I think we both know that was the right thing, but for the years before that, for making you feel like you weren't enough." I was quiet for a moment, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "Thank you for saying that." "You were always enough, Dennis. I just couldn't see it. I was so focused on what I thought we should have that I never appreciated what we did have." "We both made mistakes, Zoe. Maybe. But you never made me feel worthless. You never criticized everything I did or made me apologize for who I was." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry it took losing you for me to understand what I'd lost." I looked out at the harbor, watching a cargo ship make its way slowly toward the port. "Are you happy now? Really happy?" "I'm comfortable. Richard gives me everything I thought I wanted. But Dennis, comfortable isn't the same as happy, is it?" "No," I said gently, "it's not. I hope Ellen knows how lucky she is. I'm the lucky one." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my father's office, thinking about the different paths our choices create. Zoe had chosen comfort and status. I had chosen authenticity and connection. Neither was wrong, but only one had led to peace. At 6:30, I left the office and drove to Ellen's apartment. She greeted me at the door wearing jeans and a paint-stained sweater, her gray hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked beautiful. "How was your day?" she asked, taking the coffee from my hands and kissing my cheek. "Good. I helped a young couple save their business." "That must feel wonderful." I followed her into the small kitchen, watching her move efficiently around the space, preparing the pancake batter from scratch. This was what I'd been searching for all those years without knowing it. Not just love, but the right kind of love. Love that celebrated who I was, instead of trying to change me. "Ellen," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you first met me, when you interviewed me, what did you think?" She smiled, not looking up from the mixing bowl. "I thought you were the most genuinely content person I'd ever met. You seemed comfortable in your own skin in a way that's very rare." "Even though I'm not flashy, not trying to impress anyone?" She stopped stirring and looked at me directly. "Dennis, do you know what impressed me most about you?" "What?" "The way you talked about your father. The respect in your voice, the pride in carrying on his work, and that watch." She nodded toward my wrist. "Most successful men wear expensive watches as status symbols. You wear yours like a prayer." I felt my throat tighten with emotion. "I love you." "I love you too." She went back to stirring the batter. "Now sit down and tell me about this young couple you helped today." As I told her about Sarah and David Chen, about their dreams and struggles and hopes for the future, I realized something profound. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because I'd achieved something or accumulated something or impressed someone, but because I'd finally stopped, pretending to be anyone other than myself. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, marking the moments of a life finally lived authentically. Outside Ellen's kitchen window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere across town, a young couple was probably celebrating the loan that would save their business. My father had been right about choice. The choice to be who you really are, not who the world expects you to be. It had taken me 61 years to fully understand that lesson, but better late than never. I was home at last, not in a place, but in myself. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough.